So, Peter, in 1985, in Trinity Group, I think you were offered the biggest staffing contract at the time, that existed at the time.
It was the biggest contract at the time that had ever been awarded in staffing, and we were one of the 4 companies that were chosen to supply it. At the time, it was, gosh, my memory serves me right, it was like an $80 million contract, which was divided amongst the 4 companies, so that was our first big win, you know, and that really propelled Trinity people. And
did you feel pressure though at that time? You were 26.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel pressure to continue to achieve at that very high level? And if you did it take its toll on your mental health?
No, I've always been very competitive with myself. You know, I'm probably my own, you know, biggest critic. Although there are other people who are come quite close second. I'm constantly trying to look at ways that we can improve, new ways of doing things. Yeah. I think you have to. There is no such thing as an original thought. You know, they've all been thought. So the best thing to do is to try and just borrow somebody else's ideas, you know, that works,
and just do it better.
And do it better. And,
yeah.
You know, there's always a better mousetrap.
So you didn't feel pressure. That didn't.
No, I really enjoyed the trappings that goes with success, and you know, the trappings of, you know, and at one stage, you know, you know, I remember one time we had in the US, you know, I took over this company and we ended up with about 550 employees, you know, and I remember at the time thinking, you know, and then plus the employees that I already had, you know, so we were probably up around 650, 700 employees. I remember one time thinking, gosh, this is an awful lot of families that you're feeding here, you know.
Yeah,
and
responsibility.
A lot of, yeah. I actually then ended up selling that company with the 500 employees and it was one of the happiest days of my life. It's like, you know, they say the staffing is business is not. I don't. We are executive search. We do the high level recruiting. We don't do the lower level.
CEOs and.
We do, yes, C-suite. You know, but this was you know, temporary, secretarial, accountants, that sort of thing. You know, and it was just you know, a nightmare. It was profitable.
Yeah.
You know. I had a late lunch and I was just reading the newspaper and I got, you know, when you get to that age, you look at the death column, see how you're doing compared to the other people. You see, how am I doing compared to the average, you know?
I'm not there. Great, it's a good day.
You know, and I was thinking, no. And I'd heard of Avail Staffing because they had 5 or 6 offices in Atlanta, but, so I thought, it said that Catherine Henson had passed away, you know, suddenly. So I didn't say anything. There was no news about her or anything at all about how she'd passed. And so I just rang up the company and I said, "Who's running things?" And they said, "Kevin Lecomte is the COO." I said, "Can I talk to Kevin?" And put me through. And he said, "Well, Peter, where are you?" And I said, "I'm in Meehan's pub having lunch." It was, you know, he said, "Well, do you want to come over and we can have a chat?" I said, "I don't like talking on the phone about it, you know." So I said, "Sure." So I go over and I meet with him, and he had the whole board there, you know. I thought this. I said, "So."
Like they were waiting for you.
Yeah, and I said, "So what?" You know, he said, "Look, I'll come straight to the point, Peter." He said, "Unless you can write a check for $1 million. He said, "You know, there's no point really having a discussion." He said, "Because we have a problem and we have to write the payroll, the wages have to be, you know." And I said, well, I can certainly write a check for $1 million, but, you know, what security, what collateral, etc., you know, will I get for it, you know? And they said, well, we've got property, we've got a big cruiser boat, we've got all sorts of, you know. And but then subsequently it emerged that there was an IRS lien had just been placed on the company.
Inland Revenue Service.
Yeah, and so they said to me, well, you know, and my solicitors got involved, and they said, well, look, if you buy the company, you also buy the IRS lien, and that will apply to all of your businesses. So what happened was we decided that we couldn't buy the company because of the IRS lien, but, you know, there was all these people that were basically not getting paid, and so I sort of came up with a plan where we would actually just offer to pay the employees for the week's wages that they hadn't been paid, but they'd have to agree to stay on with us for a 6-month period, you know.
Sure.
And I went around all the companies and explained to them what had happened. And
was that altruism that prompted you to do that?
No, it was the desire to make money. I could see an opportunity, you know, and so what I did was I got a letter from the bank saying that, you know, saying that I could write a check for $1 million, and I then went to all these different companies and said, look, I will take over the payroll, because see, they had people that had not been paid for the week's wages, the previous week's wages, because the checks had all bounced. And I ended up then, I said, look, I'll make good for the last week's wages, I'll pay them, take over the payroll, but I need you to agree to give me a 6-month contract. And so we ended up taking over 500 employees in the space of 2 weeks.
And they got paid.
And they got
paid.
paid.
And you see the damage that was caused, for instance, recently in America with the federal employees not being paid for such a long period.
Yeah.
It's devastating.
Well, these are people that live paycheck to paycheck, so you can imagine. So it was a win-win-win. You know, I ended up with a profitable business. The company that, you know, their production carried on, so it was a win for them. All they had to do was give me a 6-month contract. And then it was a win for the employees because they got paid the week's money that they wouldn't get paid, and they. So
it was a win-win all around. But ethics in business, I know, is important to you because you wrote a book a number of years ago now, I think, about Tata, the biggest company in the world, and a very ethical company.
It is the most amazing company because it's controlled and owned by controlled largely by 66% by the philanthropic trusts, which you know, it's such an amazing company. But they're in so many different industries. They're in Tata Steel, is the second largest steel company in the world now. It's merged with ThyssenKrupp. Tata Motors is one of the largest car manufacturers in the world. They own Jaguar Land Rover. Tetley Tea is the largest tea producer in the world. We've got, they own 5-star hotels, the Taj chain of hotels all around the world. The Pierre is one, not 5-star.
The contracts, though, of these employees there's a lot of ethics bound up in those.
Every employee of the Tata companies has to sign the Tata Code of Conduct and Ethics, which is an amazing document, and they really do live and walk the talk when it comes to ethics. And you know, when you look at the tragedy that we experienced in Ireland with the banks and the lack of ethics, and you look at the people like Charles Haughey, who was the leader of the country, you know, who basically was a crook, you know, and you just think, you know, if only he had been ethical, you know, that whole spiral, that culture of corruption that pervaded his whole legacy, you know, and the part that really, you know, when I think about what the damage that he inflicted, you know, on the country, and a lot of people are still paying for it. You know, it's still. But
the suffering goes on now, and you're talking about banks and ethics and being kind. And you know, the problem we have now at the moment is, for instance, the home repossessions, we have the vulture funds.
See,
We have somebody like you.
I actually have a problem with the word vulture funds.
Okay.
And let me explain to you why. These are financial institutions which were invited in by the government because nobody else would provide funding, right? So they are financial institutions who have attracted capital from wealthy individuals. They put their money into these in banks, investment banks, and they may or may not get their money back. There's no guarantee that they will or they won't. Generally speaking, they do get the money back, but they're basically they were invited in.
And they're buying at a huge discount. And you can't blame them for that, I suppose. If they're offered it. But what about the banks selling those properties, those homes, to the owners at a discount? Why was that bypassed? Why couldn't that be done?
That should have been done. And the government should have, but the government has made so many stupid decisions that you can't even begin to start wondering where did the stupidity start and when did it stop, and it still hasn't stopped, But, I mean, the vulture funds, inverted commas, are basically financial institutions. People put money in there, they're hoping they'll get a return on them. They may or they may not. A lot of them don't. A lot of them lose their money. Some of them make a lot of money. But it's a risk. It's not that, it's like the bondholders. My goodness, how come the bondholders, got all of their money back? The bondholders are people who take a risk. I mean, if you want, at the time, you could have, at the time of the bondholder crisis, for example, if you wanted to buy a treasury bond, the United States Treasury bond, which is the most secure bond, right? You had to pay 0.5 percentage point to actually buy the bond, And on the other hand, you could put your money in an Irish bond and get 6.5 or 7%. And, are you trying to tell me that there wasn't a risk difference, between you had to actually pay to buy a US Treasury bond, and over here, you could actually pay 0.5 point to leave it, to get it secure in a US bond, or you could put it in an Irish bond and get 6.5 or 7%. And people didn't think there was a risk differential. Of course there was, So that's why I think it was totally wrong that the bondholders were paid back. The vulture funds, inverted commas, no one else would bring money in. They couldn't get money from any other source. Now, whether they behaved correctly and some of them didn't, and that's not in any way...
Although there is talk, some people would say that the vulture funds actually have been easier to deal with than some of the
what really annoyed me...
For people we're talking about really, not the buy-to-let, but the people who are...
Well, what really actually got me was we had these builders, who went into NAMA for a fortune, and then NAMA actually retained them and put them on ridiculous salaries to actually help unravel the mess that they had created, So, there's an awful lot of, and I don't think that it's right that they all got off without. I mean, how many people went to jail? How many of the bankers went to jail? What, 3 or 4?
Not very many.
3 or 4 of them.
And the tsunami of repossessions that we hear is just around the corner. And can I say, I don't know whether you want to talk about this, but it was something that I noted about you when we were doing a little research, obviously, before you came in. And it seems like a really good approach to the homelessness situation and the repossession cases, where you found people in Donegal whose homes were just about...
Although they were in Derry.
They were in Derry.
All the homes were in Derry. Yeah, and that turned out to be a win-win.
But, I mean, and if it was a good business decision, absolutely great. But tell us about that, because I think it's very interesting. If it could be done on a larger scale.
It was an opportunity. A lot of people were actually being forced out of their houses by the banks. They were being repossessed, but they didn't want to leave, but they wanted to stay in their home, and so it was an opportunity to basically buy these homes at a significant discount, rent them back to the people who wanted to stay in it. They looked after them. They were lovely tenants because they were their homes.
It was their home.
And they wanted to stay in it, you know. And then eventually, when I decided to exit that 5 or 6 years later, in some instances, I actually sold them back to the people who, you know, bought them actually back from me.
So they could pay you a rent that was affordable, and then ultimately, some of them, as you say, bought back. I mean, it seems like a very good plan.
It was a win-win. It was a win-win. You know,
Yeah.
I think that the government should have got more involved in those type of schemes. You know, and
these are the kind of schemes that we would like to see in government, and which I suppose leads me to the next question. You know, you've run for the Seanad, you've run for the presidency. On the foot of that success, your very, very tangible and good result in the presidential election, you then stated that you'd be interested in looking at running for the general election, and you were looking at Fianna Fáil, and you were looking at Micheál Martin's job. That was a bit elusive, I know. But then you were going to start another party.
I think
so. I think
Micheál Martin is a very, you know, he's a. I mean, I have a lot of time for him. I think he is a very genuine person. I think he's also quite naive, you know, and I don't think he. It was the height of stupidity not to take the two-year deal that he was offered by Enda Kenny. If he had taken the two-year deal, he would have been the Taoiseach for the last 18 months. He would have been the person that would have been meeting the Pope, for what that's worth. But he would have been the person that would have been in the spotlight, negotiating with Theresa May. He would have been the person that, you know, would have been giving out ministerial posts to all his colleagues, and, you know, the only reason. And
he's a very persuasive speaker. I mean,
he's a very good speaker, but he is, I think, incredibly naive. You know, this supply and confidence nonsense is all it's doing is supplying confidence to Fine Gael. And I find it just bizarre that, now, the only reason that if I had been offered the two-year deal, there's only one reason why I would have turned it down, and that would have been if I had to take the first 2 years.
Right, at that critical time.
You know, because the first 2 years, you know, the most important of the two-year would have been the second 2 years. When you're coming up for election, you're the Taoiseach, you've got the TV on you every day, your ministers are on TV every day.
And he's good at that.
And he would have been great at that. And as it is now, he's obviously going to go down as the first Fianna Fáil leader not to become Taoiseach.
You've predicted that quite some time ago, that you think he'd be the only Fianna Fáil leader who will never be Taoiseach. So you've made another bet.
Well, anyway, I didn't say he'd be the only one. The one that comes after him may not become Taoiseach either. I think the Fianna Fáil party is going the way of the Labour Party. You know. You've
made another bet as well about the candidates in Donegal in the next general election. Who's going to win places and who's going to lose their seats? And you were looking at yourself.
If I stand, we were, as a family, we still have to make a few decisions, you know. Yeah. But I don't think.
You're not worried, though, that you were on a tide of great success. I mean, it was very. In some ways, it's very hard to come second, because it's what if. But at the same time, it was a huge result. I mean, as I say, to go from 1% in the polls to 23.4% was massive.
I think it was 0.5% actually.
23.5%. Okay.
No, I said I was at 0.5%.
You were at 0.5%.
Yeah, it was 500 to 1 at the beginning. Yeah.
How, when that happened, you're obviously a man that can deal with adversity and triumph, and you treat them both the same, in the words of that famous poem by Rudyard Kipling. But how did it feel if you were at 0.5%? How did you feel at that time? And equally, how did you feel when you suddenly shot up?
You know, it was, well, It was when I started just speaking my mind and saying what the first thing that came into my mind, whereas before I'd been told to, you know, inner voice, outer voice was what kept getting drummed into me. You know, inner voice, outer voice. You can't say what's on your mind. You have to be politically correct.
Sure.
You're smiling too much. You have to be more like Sean Gallagher. Look at Sean, always serious, you know. And I'm going, like, you look as if you're having like too much fun, you know. And I was going, well, actually, you know, I quite enjoyed it, you know. And as soon as
that made you likable, actually.
Well, I think what it is, you know, I mean, like, if you look at, I mean, there's some things that are so obvious to me that I can't understand why they're not obvious to everyone else. So, for example, why do we have an Air Force? Like, we're not going to invade anybody. We can't stop anybody from invading us. Yet we've got 27 fixed-wing aircraft, and all we're doing is training pilots for Ryanair. You know, and Aer Lingus. It's just, what we should do is get rid of the 27 aircraft and replace them with 12 air ambulances to help rescue people who are getting heart attacks or strokes or in car accidents in rural Ireland. So that they can go there and a doctor will be on board the helicopter. It'll be fit for purpose. I think fit for purpose should be the mantra. If you run any business, it has to be fit for purpose. And if you look at, for example, you know, the Catholic Church is a very good example of an organisation which is not fit for purpose. It's obviously not going to exist in 20, 25 years' time, and they don't seem to care.
Well, you would like to see a woman pope?
I think a woman pope would be an excellent concept. You know, I mean, it's obvious that men like to have sex, and, you know, and it's not normal for men not to have sex.
Peter, some women do as well.
And women like to have sex as well. And that's why, but it's bizarre that no one has asked the question, why are women treated like second-class citizens? You know, I mean, why can a woman not become a priest?
I always think of St. Teresa, who was mad to be a priest, actually.
You know,
she had to accept it ultimately, but yeah, it's a question, all right.
It is. I find it just bizarre that, you know, if I was running an organisation that was rapidly declining, running out of resources, I would do something about it. You know, and if you look at it,
so if you're the Taoiseach.
If I was
Let's get back to politics.
Well, if I was the Taoiseach, like for example, you look around the world and you say, okay, we've got a housing crisis. Okay, look around Ireland, we've got a housing crisis. We actually then, so how do you solve housing crisis? So you look around and you say, well, America had a massive housing crisis after the Second World War. You had all the servicemen coming home. So they introduced the GI Bill, which basically co-funded a co-ownership scheme where a serviceman or woman coming home could actually get 50% funding on an interest-free loan for 25 years, as long as they bought a new home. So that created the biggest boom in the history of the American economy, you know, because it stimulated all the other auxiliary industries. We should do exactly the same thing here, but it should be in rural Ireland. So, for example, if you don't want to do it in Dublin, you want to do it in rural Ireland where you want to stimulate the economy. And that will encourage businesses then to relocate to rural Ireland. And that will stimulate the whole economy of rural Ireland. And, you know, you look at, for example, even just building...
Britain after the World War II.
But even just...
the homes went up at a rate of knots.
Even just the way that we build houses here. For example, this whole idea of, you know, up in Donegal, you've got concrete slab blocks, insulation block, and then you've got bison slab concrete ceilings. You know, I mean, you don't need concrete ceilings in your house. You know, timber frame brick veneer houses can be thrown up in a...
Absolutely.
You know,
you see this on reality TV shows where they build a home in a week.
Where I live in Atlanta, part-time, and they built 300 houses in under 6 months. 300. And they're fabulous houses. They're 3-4 bedrooms. They're just absolutely, and they're beautiful homes, beautiful finish. and they did them in 6 months,
Probably
300 homes.
affordable. We won't get on to the children's
you know,
hospital. I'm
well,
sure you're
I mean, there's another
distraught
example
at the
isn't
overrun
it?
of the bill.
Well, and Leo Varadkar was the Minister for Health at the time when this was going on. And people seem to have forgotten that, and they shouldn't.
I don't think they have.
I think it's a disgrace, that this is like it started off at 450 million, and it now looks as if it's going to be north of 2 billion.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
And we're paying 250,000 to PwC to do an audit as to why it got so ridiculously expensive. I mean, it's just so it's so frustrating when you look at this waste that's going on. And another classic example is, like, for example, we have got areas of Ireland that will never get broadband simply because the fibre optic cables don't go up and down mountains and across rivers that well. We should have gone straight to 4G. Every single cell phone in Ireland would have 5 bars on it. We would have 20 to 25 meg in your up and down. That's all you need to run your business. That's all you need to do your video, your Netflix. And this idea of we've spent 1.5 billion laying fibre optic cables that we will in 5 years' time, when we all go to 5G, say, why did we waste all that money?
Waste that time.
Waste that time
and there's
and
no
money.
doubt that it does kill business deals.
It
People
kills-
can't do business. If you're on the phone and you can't talk to somebody, it's very frustrating.
You can't drive from...
I mean, I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago. You're in Donegal. I could barely hear you.
I get 1 bar in my home in Donegal,
Yeah.
and I'm
One
getting...
bar as in for a drink or...
on my cell phone, I get 1 bar, and I'm actually getting, and that's actually coming from the UK. It comes across from McGilligan, so that's it's ridiculous, and it's so annoying and frustrating because
it's fixable.
It's so fixable, and it's fixable quickly.
Yeah.
Like, for example, cyberbullying. How do you fix that? Very, very simple. You get the providers all in one big room, Facebook and WhatsApp and Google, all the people who are involved in it, and you turn around and say, you have got 3 months to fix this problem, or we're going to start fining you, and we will fine you 10 million a month each for the first, and then if you haven't fixed it in 6 months, we'll double the fines, and if you haven't fixed it, they can fix it.
It has to be big enough to hurt them.
It has to be big enough to hurt them, and they can fix it, and it's so frustrating that they don't. Another thing, for example,
does this country and does the government not feel beholden to the Facebooks and all of the jobs that they're bringing here? Are they bringing jobs here? Are they swapping personnel?
It's a very good question. They've just announced that Salesforce are going to hire 1,500 people here. But they're not creating 1,500 new jobs. I mean, they'll go and they'll take a person from Accenture or Microsoft or one of the, and they'll get their 1,500, but they'll create 1,500 vacancies.
Sure,
in
they're all
other places.
interchangeable, aren't they? And
it's musical chairs.
Absolutely.
And I'll come to you. You're at you might be at Accenture or Deloitte or some other company, and I'll say, I've got this great job for you at Salesforce, and you say, but I'm quite happy here, and you say, yes, but we'll give you a 20% increase, and you go, okay then, and off you go.
Somebody from the other company down the road is going to get my job.
Exactly, but they'll only change for another 20% increase.
Yes.
So it's just...
And then that puts pressure, also all of those people, all of those employees, pressures on the housing market.
Of course, because the landlords are sitting there going,
Google.
Everybody's earning 20% more, so we can charge more.
Yes,
and that's what causes the rents to go up. So, but the one thing that really, my main platform, of course, as you know, was the diaspora. And, we could turn around and get all of these social media companies together and say, okay, we want you to bid on a diaspora contract. And the bid starts at $1 billion, right? So if you're not interested in $1 billion, but it's, we've got about 75 million people around the world. We want to connect with them. We want to get them to get Irish passports. And he said, it's very hard. You're entitled to one, but you have to find out where your grandparents were. If they're, and there's all sorts of technicalities. There's a lot of rich people who'd be so proud to have an Irish passport. They don't want to come and live here. They're very happy living in Australia or America or wherever. But we would create an operation where they would bid for it. Now, whoever wins the bid would have the ability to issue the passports through the government, right? So it would be controlled and regulated by the government, okay? It's a little bit like the Federal Reserve Bank in America. Everybody thinks the Federal Reserve Bank is actually owned by the government. It's not. It's owned by wealthy individuals, shareholders, and other banks. But it's regulated by the government. So the same thing, I would actually, and just look, for example, at India. India outsources their passport issuance and visa issuance and everything else. So if you want to get your visa, it's a company that they've outsourced. Now it's managed and completely managed and controlled by the Indian government. And they outsource it to this other company, and it's a win-win.
And what are the consequences for Ireland if we could do that?
Well, just think of, there could be huge benefits. For example,
tourism.
Not just tourism. One of the things that I suggested was that, you know, we imitate the Israeli birthright program, which is one of the most successful programs. And what they do is they bring children over to Israel and they give them the whole Israeli experience. And when they go over, they spend some time in a kibbutz. They go around the Weeping Wall. They talk to all the leaders of the Jewish community. Yes. They get, and when they go back to America or wherever, it started in America. They're so inspired by the experience.
They're connected.
And we should do that. We should bring the children over from. It started off being funded by wealthy Israelis, and then the Israeli government is actually now taking over minds because they realise that it's a real money spinner, But it really helps the tourism. But if you were to bring children from the Irish diaspora abroad over to Ireland for a month, to spend a week up in Belfast in the north and Derry, understanding what happened there, 2 weeks down in the Gaeltacht, and then a week down in Dublin, understanding the whole history and essence of Ireland. That would, first of all, it would create a huge tourism, because the parents would probably come with them anyway, or come over to pick them up or drop them off. And it would be such a huge.
But the kid will come back repeatedly over their lifetime.
Repeatedly over their lifetime, and they will go back and they'll tell their friends.
You're so passionate about this. This is one of your key policies, I think.
It was, and it got completely. And if you look at there are so many people who are so proud to be Irish, and there are people. They're not even Irish that are proud to be Irish. They're people like
any connection.
Chuck Feeney, one of the most amazing,
think
generous
of all the people
men.
that we could get playing for Ireland as well.
Look at Chuck Feeney. There's a great example. He's not even Irish, and he gave away $2 billion to Irish universities. What an amazing man. And there's other amazing people like Don Keogh. Who's the chairman and CEO of Coca-Cola, who give away hundreds of millions to Irish, help fund charitable endeavours in Ireland. Neville Isdale, the Epic Centre, another amazing. Neville's still very active, but there's amazing people like that. If we can tune in to the Irish abroad.
Yes.
It's our biggest asset, our most valuable asset, and it's underutilised, and we should.
So look, you need to be in government.
Well,
So, you've finished with Fianna Fáil. You're thinking more of your own party.
They may change their.
Are we
mind.
looking at your?
They may change their mind.
You think they may come begging, Peter?
You never know. You never know. You just don't know. With Fianna Fáil, you just don't know.
Listen, can I ask you something? Because I'm totally off on a tangent now. But you mentioned there earlier that your mother was a good singer and she was a big entertainer. And was a very outgoing person. So I've always thought you have a very nice speaking voice. It's a very sonorous, melodious voice. Do you sing?
I do. I can empty a pub in less than 30 seconds. If it gets the last orders and you want everybody to leave. Just
what would your party piece be?
Oh, well, actually, the party piece that I'm quite good at singing is Poisoning Pigeons in the Park by Tom Lehrer,
Sing a verse of it.
Oh, no, well, that will not ruin the podcast. But no,
I don't know that.
It's that one. Spring is here, spring is here. Life is skittles, life is beer. I think the loveliest time of the year is the spring. I do, don't you? Of course you do.
That's lovely.
So, but it's, it's a very entertaining little song.
Yeah.
But
it's a story.
But there's, just getting back to the diaspora. We pay lip service to it, and we've got a minister for the diaspora. We should have a minister for.
Sorry, do we?
We have a minister for diaspora. Yeah, he's actually a very nice guy, Kieran Canning, and I've actually had him play the piano in my house in Atlanta.
The Invisible Man.
Well, but you see, there's the thing. If we really, we've got a minister for defence, which is obviously the Taoiseach, and why do we even have a minister for defence? We should have a minister for the United States. We've got 700 major corporations here in Ireland, and that's where we should be focusing on. That should be a cabinet post. I really believe that. There should be somebody that the 700 companies that employ hundreds of thousands of people and pay, I think it's about 80% of our tax comes from these companies. We should have a minister there representing those
Would you
companies.
like that job?
No. If I was going into government, I'd like to be the Taoiseach, but okay. I don't. But no. But on a serious note, that's a position.
Are you not serious about it? Do you want to be Taoiseach?
Well, we'll see what happens. We have to make a few family decisions first,
Yeah.
So we're going through an interesting phase in our family. The children are all leaving home.
Yeah.
And having to,
And would they influence you? Like, would you really take on board, what? I presume you will always take on board what Helen says.
Of course. No, I think that the children obviously are all going to go their own way. I've got one going to New Zealand next week. I've got one in Dublin. Who knows where they'll all end up.
Yeah. Well, the focus really throughout the podcast has been on your life before you became famous, before Dragon's Den and subsequently the presidential election. I do want to ask you one question about the election. That was in terms of the media. The media, I think to a very large extent, were critical. Some attempted to vilify you. Some were even-handed and fair. Some sections where I thought, fair enough. And yet, you got 23.4% of the vote. Mm-hmm. Can you account for the disparity?
The media is, made up of people who get up in the morning with an empty sheet of paper, and if they don't fill it with something, then they get fired and they lose their job. So, that's a very simplistic definition of what a journalist is, but they start off the day with an empty pad of paper, and they have to, if they don't fill it with something, then they end up getting fired. So once you understand that, then you understand how journalists think and operate, There are some very good journalists. There are some that just make stuff up just to fill up the page, and there are some where there were some hurtful things that were said and totally misrepresented and things like that. But I think if you really understand that's what their job is. Their job is to basically fill that blank page of paper that they get handed every day. You just take it with a grain of salt, and
it's the art of not taking it personally. Really, is it?
I think it's important that you do listen. It's important that you listen to the people you trust and people who you respect. But I don't think you should listen to journalists too much.
And get off Twitter. That mentally that keeps it sound. But in your case, actually, there was an awful lot of very favourable comment from people.
I think there was an awful lot of very negative ones too. I actually didn't really get into Twitter much in the campaign, just because, you know, watching Trump and his Twitter, you
And
just think, I didn't want to be, you know, I was trying to dissociate myself from Trump.
From Trump,
know.
yeah. Well, you've gone on the record as really not liking him very much, and
I don't think
very critical of him.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is. There's no doubt that he's actually probably some of the things that he's doing are probably good for America. You know, like for example, making American companies return their funds from overseas, you know, that's, you know, good for America. It's certainly not going to be very good for the European banking system because a lot of the money's been repatriated. A lot of these European banks are going to struggle to pass the stress tests because their funds have all been repatriated. So I think you're starting to see the implications of that.
Well, up until recently, there was talk about him. There'd be no question of him not winning a second term. But I think that the wall and the federal employees not being paid might be a turning point.
Oh, not at all. No, that'll be forgotten about. That's yesterday's news now. The people that weren't getting paid were all Democrats. So that won't have any impact whatsoever on Trump. I think more likely the cause of the problem will be Mueller when the Mueller report comes out, and when Cohen testifies in front of Congress. I think that could be very damaging, and that could certainly be a turning point when Cohen actually testifies in front of Congress, because he'll be then forced to answer openly questions that he probably doesn't want to. Well, yeah, that will be very embarrassing and very.
He denies everything, and he's kind of. You often think, you know, what further hell can happen that he can overcome? He seems to have overcome everything, but you're thinking that might be.
I think that's
something
could,
just a little too far for him to.
Yeah,
there
is no doubt that Trump's legacy will be the Supreme Court. Look, you know, he's already appointed two justices to the Supreme Court, and he's tilted the balance that will be there for years to come. And he will probably, unfortunately, get a third appointee with Ruth Bader Ginsburg not being in great health, and she's, I think, 86. She's determined to try and hold on, but you know, for her not to show up at the first oral arguments, it's the first time since she was appointed that she didn't turn up. So I think I'm very concerned about that. So that could be, unfortunately, that could be Trump's legacy in the Supreme Court.
What do you think, Peter, will be your legacy?
Oh, it's far too early to say.
Personal and professional.
You know, I think that I would like to think that I have, you know, I would like to think that I have inspired some people to take the entrepreneurial jump, you know, and I think that I would like to think that I've influenced people to do that and have fun doing it, which, you know, maybe, just maybe, it might have encouraged some people to actually speak their mind. There's an awful lot of, what would you call it, just talking out of both sides of your mouth, as it were, in politics. And I think that, you know, perhaps, just perhaps, people might now realize that if you actually speak directly and don't try and be so politically correct, that people actually respect that and they appreciate it.
Yeah.
And they, I think that is something that if even that has influenced people just a little bit,
yes,
it'll have improved.
Well, I think the only PC thing about you is your initials.
Yeah, that was quite. Somebody pointed that out. I never even thought of that. But yeah, I mean, I think if it influences people just a little bit to be more open, more direct, and you know, one of my mantras, which you know I live by, is, you know, you'd worry less what other people think about you if you realized how seldom they do. You know, people don't spend time thinking about Peter Casey. you know, and I long ago gave up worrying what other people think about me, you know.
And because the reality is they may not be
They
thinking about you at all, although
they're thinking about,
I don't think that's the case, Peter, anymore for you.
they're thinking about themselves. People don't get up in the morning and think, oh, Peter Casey this or Peter Casey that. They get up in the morning and they think, how do I feed my children today? How do I, you know,
how's their life?
how can I,
for their family.
how do I manage to improve? And how, you know, and there are so many people that are just, you know, in that, what I call the coping class, where they just can't get ahead and they can't see light at the end of the tunnel. And you know, it's getting harder and harder for somebody to afford to buy a home, for somebody to afford.
You know,
to
people slag the millennials and give out about them and they're this, that, and the other, and they're entitled. But actually, I feel terribly sorry for them, because this is the first generation really where it's very likely that most of them won't be able to afford their own home, where most of them I mean, they're going back at 22, 23, 24 when they should be out in the world. They're going back home. They're saying that up to 34 years of age, some of these young people are staying in the family home.
It's interesting, you know, if you look at the statistics are that a third of the people working in Dublin today were not born in Ireland, you know, and a third of the people that are, ironically, a third of the people that were actually born in Ireland have left Ireland. But that's, we need to reverse that trend. You know, we need to have, and you know, I've never before seen so many people sleeping in street corners here, you know, at night. It shouldn't be that people are sleeping in doorways in Dublin. It's just wrong, you know, and the government should make that a priority. And the healthcare system, talking about, you know, fit for purpose, we just mentioned there the massive overspend on the you know, it started off at 450 million and it's now going to be well north of 2 billion by the time. It's going to be the most expensive per bed hospital in the world.
It's the greatest number of homeless children,
you know,
at the moment, and Temple Street recently said that I think they said that the amount of, there was a frightening statistic, the amount of children that they deal with, such a huge proportion of those children were going back to homeless accommodation or, you know, emergency accommodation.
It's just, you know,
which is,
and it's
traumatizing for
and then
for years.
You look at the you know, the refugees that we, you know, if you're going to make an offer to bring in refugees, which we should, but you have to look after them. You have to help them assimilate into the society. Yeah, at the moment they're not allowed to work. They can't, like, they were not allowed to travel outside of, you know, the country. I mean, it's so. It's like you inviting me to your house for the weekend and put me in a room without any electricity, or, you know, or not.
Well, you were going to do that to Helen, for goodness sake, with the castle, no electricity, the haunted castle.
We were going to. It was going to be beautiful when it was finished, you know. But,
I'm sure it was.
You know.
Listen, I want to thank you very much for coming in today. Really appreciated it.
You're very welcome.
Me on the other side. I suppose just finally, on a spiritual note, in terms of the other side, when we all shuffle off this mortal coil, what do you think you'll find on the other side?
Do you know, I think that I try not to think too much about it, because at the end of the day, there's not much you can do about it. You know, if you spend time worrying about what's on the other side, you're missing out on the journey, the incredible journey that we're on this side. So, you know, I'm hoping that there'll be some people that won't be on the other side. But and I have no idea where I'll end up. But I'm a big believer that there is something there at the end of the day, but I don't know exactly where or what it is, you know. I think, my mother and father got great spiritual comfort out of their faith, which I think is a shame, you know, even if you're a cynic and you're looking at the Catholic Church, you know, as an insurance policy that you take out, and every day you pay your premium by praying and going to mass and doing that sort of thing. Then when you get to the end of your days, the insurance company turns up and writes the check. You go straight to heaven, and they write checks to the relatives. Look, she's gone to heaven, and you know, everybody feels good that my mother's in heaven. And now the insurance company is going into Chapter 11. You know, it's going broke. You know, like the convents are closing down, the churches are all going to be turning into nightclubs or discotheques or keep gyms or you know, office accommodation. It's sad, but that's, you know, unless they do something, there's not going to be any priests to say mass, you know, and you know, the insurance company will be closing down, you know.
Well, you've made a number of bets on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is that there'll be a future female pope.
Would you be Irish? I didn't say there would be. I said there should be.
There should be.
And there's no reason why there shouldn't be, and there's no reason why there can't be women priests, bishops, cardinals. Can you imagine if the conclave had a... I mean, if you think about it, I run an executive search firm. Well, I don't, but I used to. And if you retained me to find a leader for a large, you know, global organization that's got 1 billion people in, well, it used to have, in it, and I produced a bunch of candidates and they were all in their 70s. You know, you'd say, Peter, excuse me, we want somebody who's, you know, vibrant, somebody who can, you know, I mean,
that's very ageist of you.
Isn't it? You know, but you know, I mean, you'd say, Peter, have you lost your mind? I want. They forget that the guy that started the whole gig started when he was 30. Yeah. You know, and he finished.
Well, you're a big supporter of women, though, and you in the presidency, you talked about how your Council of State would be made up of women. Okay, so pick 3 women that you think should head up this organisation, this global organisation of 1 billion plus. Who would you nominate?
Who would I think? That's a very good question. Obviously yourself, I'd have. Well, you know, I'd have to.
Well,
you'd have to.
They do call me Mother Theresa.
You know,
okay.
Yeah,
I don't think in a good way they call me Mother Theresa, but
you know, and I you know, I probably wouldn't put Theresa May on it either, but you know, I don't know. You know, there are some incredibly influential, you know, powerful, respectable women that I think would be wonderful leaders, you know, of the church. I don't want to, you know, pick anyone out who's. I'm not.
Apart from me.
Apart from you.
I'm not Theresa May. No.
Apart from yourself, Theresa would be better than probably the current incumbent, you know, in getting things done, you know. But I mean, when you think about it, what has the Pope Francis actually done? You know, what has he actually done? If you were to look at a rating, you know, and give him a...
I think he started off very well, and I think we all seem to like the humility of the man. He lived in poverty. He dispensed immediately with the pomp of, you know, when he was elected Pope, he decided he was going to go back in the bus with the cardinals, and none of that.
Yeah, well, that was good. The first 6 weeks was good. Yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah, it was good for the first 6 weeks. But what has he actually done? You know, what has he actually done? You know, and the answer is nothing. He has changed nothing. He has made no impact whatsoever on the crisis that is facing the Catholic Church. Zero. And I would give him, you know, a C minus, you know, sorry, D minus. You know, he's done nothing. But he's a lovely, lovely man, very humble, very nice, and, you know, everything else. But what has he achieved? And that's what you look at when you're looking at a government. That's why, is it fit for purpose?
You're looking at everything through the prism of business, aren't you?
Yes.
That's the way you think.
That's the way I think.
Always thought like that.
Yeah, and I think that's just the way my mind works. And is it fit for purpose? And what has the person done, and what have they done to achieve? I mean, you look at the great leaders who have really made an impact in the societies that, look at, for example, Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, who transformed Singapore from being one of the poorest nations in the world at the time when he took it over to being, you know, one of the top, in the top 10 places to live. You know, I mean, he completely transformed it. I think he ran Singapore for about 37 years. And, you know, he was tough, but look what he achieved. So, you know, you look at people like that that really made a difference, and Roosevelt and the people who really changed society. And I don't think the Pope has done anything.
Well, apparently he thinks very highly of you. We're going to leave it at that. Thank you so much,
You're welcome.
Casey.
You're welcome.